Something else maybe that you can't do so much is just investing in renewable electricity. So thinking about solar panels that might be on your house or even small wind turbines on your house. This is hydropower electricity. This is kind of a concept idea. They don't really have this yet. But they're essentially windmills underwater that are using the waves to produce electricity. There's hydroelectric dams. Now, although you might not be able to like literally put these like on your household or within your household, a lot of power utilities, so Pepco, Washington Power, they actually are starting to have more and more options where Pepco is like buying solar farms and essentially telling their customers, it's like, hey, if you want to designate your electricity as coming from the solar farm, maybe you pay a little bit extra, but we will make sure that this solar farm is producing enough electricity to power your home. So it's pretty cool. Like, even though maybe you can't actually make it, you can actually designate with your power company of doing it. And that's pretty freaking awesome. So definitely take a look into it because it's becoming a more and more popular thing. Sometimes it doesn't even cost extra. It's the same price. I've actually seen it be cheaper before. It just depends on your area and also the time of year. But definitely take a look into it. So that was all for carbon dioxide. And remember, carbon dioxide is our biggest greenhouse gas. This is the biggest thing affecting our atmosphere. But I do want to mention methane because there's actually some simple things we can do. It is really our food. Rice is not going anywhere, but cows, like Chick-fil-A's got the right idea. Eat more chicken, right? If we're reducing the amount of cows we're eating, so reducing the number of steaks and the burgers, even the dairy products, that means the demand for cows is going down, which means not as many cows are being produced, which means not as much methane is being released. And this is incredibly important. Now, I'm not saying, hey, like, cut out all the burgers in your menu, but if you're eating a burger a day, which you shouldn't because that's a heart attack waiting to happen, but if you're eating a burger a day, maybe one of those days, eat a chicken patty, eat a veggie burger. Just reduce the amount of beef that you're intaking, and that's going to reduce the amount of cows that are being produced. This video that's popping up is another way we can reduce methane emissions. So what we didn't talk about before, landfills also produce a lot of methane because there's not a lot of oxygen in there. So there are a lot of methane producing bacteria. And that methane typically has these little pipes that are releasing that methane into the atmosphere. Now, some places in the United States and around the world are actually capturing methane from those landfills. And instead of the methane going into the atmosphere, that methane is actually being cleaned up and used as a power source for homes. So really cool technology. So go ahead and pause here, take a look at this video, and check it out because it's really, really interesting. The last, but certainly not least, I mean, as I mentioned before, a lot of the pollution that's related to climate change, not all of it, like you and me, we are part of the problem, but industries, governments, countries, I mean, they're kind of responsible and there's but so much we can do about it. We need government action to make these changes. And so taking political action, so here's the March for Science, just general protesting, but also voting for leaders that take climate change and take environmental issues seriously. You know, we make that difference. We can vote and make those decisions. So this is how we can get involved. You know, maybe we can't change that, you know, we subsidize coal, but what we can do is vote for people who won't continue those subsidies. I also want to throw a shout out here to April 22nd. So April 22nd is an incredibly important day for this class because April 22nd is Earth Day. And this is an important date to know. You know, how many of your classes get a whole day to themselves? Like Earth Day is Environmental Science Day. Earth Day was literally invented as a way to bring awareness to environmental issues. The March for Science happens on Earth Day. There's tons of different events that happen on Earth Day, so take advantage of them. Go to them, show your support, because that's also showing our politicians, that's also showing our world leaders that we care and that we support these causes. So these are things that we can do. And it's not just us. There's tons of different companies that are using their influence to also make a change. So the video that just popped up is actually a company. It's the company that makes Angry Birds, the game Angry Birds, is showing an ad for one of their games that is actually all environmentally based. And while you're watching this video, think about, okay, how can companies help inspire change as well? How can celebrities inspire change? So pause here, take a look at this link that's popping up, and then come on back. So that's what we're doing, or that's what we can do. But what is our government doing? What is the United States doing? Now, the United States gets a lot of flack looking at, oh, like, ugh, that's not good. You guys are not setting a good example. But if you remember a couple topics ago, if you looked at the United States, we were going down. Our emissions are going down. Even though our politicians might not say climate change is happening, or they might say it's all natural, there's actually changes going on in our government, and there's actually environmental rules going on that are reducing our emissions. And a lot of people don't know about them because they hear what these bigwigs are saying, but they don't actually see what's happening. This isn't to say we can't be doing more. We totally could be. But I want to share like 2 programs that we are doing. The first one is vehicle emissions. A law came out in like 2012 that stated that vehicle emissions need to be getting better. And they have been. So this chart is looking at the different goals for vehicle emissions. And what we want to look at is this bottom one, the combined cars and trucks miles per gallon. And this is looking at 2016, the average combined cars and trucks on the road needed to be 35 miles to the gallon. And our goal by the year 2025 is an average of 54 miles to the gallon. Now again, this is an average between all vehicles and light trucks on the road. So this is not saying that a Ford F-150 is going to get 54 miles to the gallon. But what this is saying is that there's going to be a lot more cars on the road that do have high gas mileage that can get our average up to there. So this is pretty freaking awesome. So although it's not shown on here, 2012, 13, 14, and 15 were lower numbers but also gaining, and all of them were achieved. Now 2016 is the newest year I could find of data. We actually did not hit our target. We hit 34, but it was still increasing. It was still better than 2015. So these are really awesome goals. The issue, what has happened with our current administration, is what they are trying to pass through Congress now is they want to take these 2020 levels, so this 41.7, and they actually want to make that the standard all the way through 2025. So instead of saying, oh, the combined needs to be 54.5, they want to say combined for all of these years needs to get to 41.7. There's arguments for both ways for this. So companies could get to the 54.5. I don't doubt that. It is happening around the world. The thing is that it does cost more money. And so companies can reach there, but the cost of those vehicles is going up. We've seen this. We've seen that the average cost of vehicles has increased over the same time period about $2,000 to $3,000, depending on the vehicle. A lot of it is because of a lot of the new technology going into the vehicles that are making them so efficient. So it's kind of a big issue. Same with Tesla. Tesla wants to make a cheap car, but it's not cheap. It is a very expensive process. So what the government's trying to do is trying to lower these standards so that the technology can kind of keep up so that we can lower those costs. Now, how much of it is because of that and how much is it because we want to kind of stagnate change? I couldn't tell you. But just kind of know that that is something that's happening. That's something that's been happening, and it has been getting better. Another kind of law that's been in place is that emissions from power plants has to be cut. So they're constantly installing new technologies to get their emissions down, and especially their greenhouse gas emissions. Again, there's been some kind of shady things that have been happening in our government that's kind of laid back on these standards, but even if the standards are being cut back, they're still more stringent than they were 10 years ago. So there are changes going underway. There's some things that are being cut to be not as stringent as they were before, but I think it's really important that what isn't getting enough credit is they are being cut nonetheless. Now, one last thing I want to talk about is the Paris Agreement, because this made a whole big deal really the past year or two. So the Paris Agreement is an agreement between pretty much like every single country in the world, except like 3, the United States kind of being one of them. So the United States was part of the Paris Agreement, and we were part of this promise. Now again, it was a promise. It was essentially all these countries coming together saying, yeah, we're going to cut back on our CO2 emissions. We're going to cut our power plants. We're going to cut our vehicle emissions. We're going to regulate industries more. But that's all it was. It's just promises. These countries, there's no world police. There's no one enforcing it. There's no fines. There's no actual punishment for not making these standards. There's no enforcement. There's nothing. Really, what they're relying on is that if you don't make the standards that you've set for yourself, that at the next meeting that they have every few years, they'll be like, oh, Poland, y'all didn't make your goal. Shame on you. That's not good. Is Poland going to care? Maybe they will. I'm not saying that they won't, but I'm saying it's not super enforceable. If you could cheat and the biggest consequence was I say, oh, you shouldn't do that, guys, and there was no consequences, I'm sure a lot more people would cheat. Same thing with this. They can say, yeah, we'll reduce our emissions, and never actually reduce their emissions. And they're just going to get called out at the meeting, but that's it. Now, this might be enough for some countries to be like, well, I don't want to be called out. Like, I want to be an example for the world. And they totally might make it. But just know that there's no actual enforcement of the regulations that countries are setting for themselves. Now, what's happened with the U.S. is we have withdrawn from the agreement. Again, doesn't quite mean much because there's no like fines or anything. But the Paris Agreement is kind of legally binding. So the United States still has to show up to the meetings and still has to represent the United States for the next 3 years. So that was something implemented within the Paris Agreement. So any country that wants to leave actually has to wait for 3 years from the time they said they're going to withdraw to actually withdraw. And I think the reason for this is so the whole thing doesn't fall apart overnight, because a lot of man hours went into this process and a lot of agreements and a lot of laws are being set, and they don't want countries just to be like, oh, we're going to leave tomorrow. They being the Paris Agreement and the people in the Paris Agreement want time to kind of figure out what they're going to do, how are they going to handle it, the representation. So technically, the United States is still in the Paris Agreement. We are withdrawing, but we will not be officially withdrawn until the year 2020. So although we did set goals when we first entered the Paris Agreement, like, we're coming out of it, so we're not really paying attention to those goals anymore. So we talked about quite a lot, right? We talked about things that you can actually do. What can you? You can change your transportation. You can change your electricity use. You can vote for those in power that can make broader scale changes, like investing in renewable energy. But you gotta vote. You gotta vote. We can also look at what we're already doing. The United States can definitely do more, but I want to give us credit where credit is due. We are doing things. Our vehicles are becoming more efficient. Our power plants are becoming cleaner. But there's a long way to go. The Paris Agreement was one of those long ways. How successful it's going to be, whether the U.S. is in it or not, I don't know. There's no enforcement, so that's going to play a lot into it. So now you know a lot more about climate change. You know what's really happening, and you know some of the ways that we can address it.